Hey, what's up guys, Nate the Feral Painter here, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating to you how we can create one of the Blood Angels Death Company Space Marines. I'll also be demonstrating how we can use Villainy inks to create unique surface finish variation. I'll also be showing you how we can blend and mix the Villainy inks to create some unique looking blood gore effects. Also stay tuned to the end of the video where I have some exciting news to share with you. The Death Company represents the tragic aspects of the Blood Angels. Blood Angels are otherwise renowned for their grace and nobility, yet the Death Company are permanently cursed with the horrifying flaw of the Black Rage. So it's this law that we're going to use to help us create and kitbash a unique Space Marine that fits within that law. So when it comes to kitbashing, it's all about adding little nuances and shapes and the way we pose that figure to enable us to encapsulate that law and represent it in the miniature that we build. Now naturally I've used one of the new Stormcaster miniatures as a base for this miniature, and what I like to do, and the best advice I can give you when trying to create a unique Space Marine like this, is dump out your bits box, get everything laid out on the table, and what I like to do is create a pile of potential parts. Now this might be parts that I quite like or are quite fitting, such as like a handle in a pistol, and I push these all off to one side, and then it's just a case of adding them to the miniature, trying out different poses and different parts, and just by tacking these on we can easily swap them at a later date. But it's important to choose parts that really encapsulate what it is that you're trying to create, such as myself, like the chest plate. It's got this large collar which is normally seen within vampires, and especially the head sculpt of these guys have been, plagued by the Black Rage for a long period of time. Their face is naturally going to start to mutate, and I almost tried to create a lore where this guy has got lots of pipes and wires going into him, and these are going to be represented as blood feeding tubes, so at any point during the battle this guy can just flick a switch and he'll instantly be filled full of rage blood, which is going to strengthen him and help him kill any enemy on the battlefield. Could also read as a representation of blood flowing through this guy's body to keep him alive, and he's just got this nice constant steady stream of blood to help him keep that Black Rage under control. These wires are really easy to create, and you can buy a kit of different sizes from like your local hobby store, or alternatively you could use paper clips. Then it's just a case of adding trinkets and trophies in and around the miniature that fit within that lore that we're trying to create, such as cheesecloth, skulls and other ornaments to decorate your miniature. Once you've completed these steps, it's really good at this point to prime up your miniature so that you've got like a unifying colour running throughout the miniature itself. And this will just help you scrutinize the miniature, make sure everything is where it needs to be, the pose is correct, and that everything fits within proportion. I think I went through about 2 or 3 renditions before I settled upon this final piece. Now throughout explaining this process, you've just seen me base coat this miniature out, and that's the sort of point we need to get to before we can start to make this miniature a little bit more grimdark. Now I'll quickly go over some of the base coats and the more intricate parts. Everything was primed out in Stynylrez Black Primer, and this is also going to act as a great base coat for the black armor itself. Now for the red bits, I gave these a little bit of a prime of Stynylrez Grey Primer, and this just acts as something for the contrast paint Flesh Tearers Red to be able to grip onto and shine through. The X on the shoulder pauldron is very easy to create. You don't need any decals, you just need some 2mm masking tape. 2mm I've found is the perfect size. Just overlap them and then spray everything black and just peel it off and enjoy the results. All the metal parts were done in scale color 75 thrash metal. The gold little accents were done in AK bronze, and then it was just a case of getting some silver and adding some chips in and around the armor. The head will come to a little bit later on in the video. Now that we've got our miniature base coated out, we can move into our Unifying Wash. Now this is just a very thin, light application of Goon's Grime, and again I've done this through an airbrush for a specific reason, to get specific results. Now if I were to come in with a brush application, yeah, I could spend a bit of time controlling it and pushing it about, but the beauty of being able to put it through an airbrush is that I get a nice, even, thin coat in and around the miniature, which is what I want for the Goon's Grime application. This is just going to act as a filter and some light dusting and grime that's naturally going to be building up on this miniature. Now when I do put it through the airbrush, I add first of all some mineral spirits, and I put 4 drops of mineral spirits in first of all, and then I go ahead and add 2 drops of Goon's Grime. This is not like your typical 1-to-1 application, this is a 2-to-1 application, and the reason I'm doing this is, again, going back to that light application, I just want it to be sort of dusted on there on the miniature, and then I give it around 15 minutes to dry, and you can use a hairdryer to help speed up this process. So because we've thinned it a little bit more than usual, and again I've done it through an airbrush, what we're left with is this really nice dusty granule effect. And what we can start to do during the removal process, again I'm using a sponge. I would recommend, if you've never done this before, using a Q-tip. It's because the sponge absorbs a little bit more of the Goon's Grime than what's usually wanted. However, over time I've just built up muscle memory and how much mineral spirits to put on my sponge, and again I just literally very lightly dip the tip into some mineral spirits and get some kitchen roll and dab off the excess, and now I can go in and start maneuvering it. And what I do first of all is use one side with the mineral spirits on to reactivate the Goon's Grime, and then flip it round with the dry end and start to push that Goon's Grime into the areas where I want it to be a little bit more heavy. So you've got like ultimate control of that granulation, and I might even come in with a brush and just start to push it around into heavier places where I want it to be. And there's nothing wrong at this point. If I want some crevices to be darker and dustier, then I'll reapply some more Goon's Grime, just thinned 1-to-1 into some of the darker crevice areas. Again, the Goon's Grime is just a very light application. Our goal here is to dust up and just add a little bit of grime in and around the miniature. Really quickly before this next section, you might notice that my sector rust looks a little bit brighter / more orange than the one that you will have. This is because I've got one of the earlier matches which is now known as Ex Machina. However, for the rest of the tutorial you can just use the sector rust that you have. However, any of the rust products from Villainy inks will also work. Next up, we're going to come in with some sector rust, and we're going to use this as a filter for some further rusting a little bit later. Now we're going to mix this 1-to-1 with mineral spirits, and the correct way to do this is get something like a tile or a palette like this, load some onto it, and then I've got a little bowl of mineral spirits. This is just like painting with acrylics, but rather than water, you've got the mineral spirits. And I just lay it out on my palette, start to mix it up, and you'll see as I go along, I'm trying to get the ratio right. If I want it a little bit more runny, because my goal here is to use it as a filter, a little bit more like glazing with acrylics, and you can see here I'm laying out one that's a little bit thicker, and then I add some mineral spirits to the other so that it's more of a wash consistency, and you'll see it run into the cracks of the palette. And this is where we need to be. It's sort of in between a pin wash and a glaze, so it's not too runny that it's just going to run into all the cracks, but we want to apply it, and you'll see as we get in a little bit later on in the video how we can also manipulate that. So I'm just using a brush application here, and I'm just working my way around, making sure I'm hitting all the places that I want to be a little bit more rusty. Maybe areas that don't get as much care, that's where you're going to apply it a little bit more, but especially crevice areas. And you'll notice, you see how it's got like a little lip going around that shoulder blade? We're going to come to that a little bit later on. That's what we sort of want with the glaze. It's more of a glaze than a crevice wash run into all crevices. And I'm just working my way around, dabbing it and adding some streaks here and there. But again, the goal here with this stage is to act as a filter. There are also two things at play here which are intentional. Now this whole process is around 5 to 10 minutes after the Goon's Grime application became dry to touch, so I've not let it cure overnight and I've not applied any varnishes. There's a very specific reason for that, is because you can still activate it at this stage. I'm letting that sector rust play and interact with with the Goons Grime. Again, it's going to mix in with it, make some areas a little bit more discoloured and a little bit more dusty and a little bit more on the matte side of things, but this is intentional, and it's a great way with the Villainy inks to be able to play with each other, because you've got that working time of reactivation and just going in. Again, if I want it to be a bit more orange, I can just go in there and add a little bit more of the rust. So now that that's started to dry, one of the unique effects of the sector rust is, depending on how much you thin it, you can control whether it's more matte or more into the satin, which is perfect for certain applications, but for this I want it to be on the more matte dusty side. So this shoulder blade here, you can see where the pigment settled. Again, like we did with the Goons Grime, I'm just going to come in with a small amount of mineral spirits on my brush and start to manipulate that pigment about, pushing into the crevices. But because we're using mineral spirits, it's going to dry on that more matte side. Now at this stage, because we've added that filter and everything is done and dry, I can now come in with a little bit of Dirty Downs rust and just very selective in certain areas where I want heavier rust to start to apply it into those areas. And again, this is a water soluble product, so you can manipulate it with water, but I'm not going crazy with it depending on how rusty you want your miniature to look. But again, on black armor, I think it just really adds to it. And now because we've got that filter of the sector rust behind it, it's also going to blend into the other areas as though that corrosion is starting to affect other panels of the armor. At this stage, I now apply some soft pressing, and this is a fantastic, if not one of my favouriteest techniques to use in miniature painting. And again, you can learn all about this technique over on the Grimdark.com on our soft pressing course. We also have a catalogue of courses over at the Grimdark Compendium where you can also learn some amazing techniques such as the glue technique and also the fur application. So be sure to head over to the Grimdarkcompendium.com and check out our latest courses. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about probably one of the most important aspects when it comes to miniature painting, especially in the Grimdark style, and that is surface finish variation. So that means that each part of the surface, let's say we've got like a rectangular shaped piece of metal, it just means that sections of that piece of metal are going to have a different finish, whether that's more of a matte finish, a satin finish, or a glossy finish. And just on that one piece, it's going to have, if it's been weathered over that time, especially something like these that have been alive for hundreds of years, it's naturally going to have a lot of surface finish variation. And we can start to achieve that with Ichor of the Dams by Villainy inks. And now, as you saw at the beginning, again, we're going to do it in a one-to-one application, and all I do is lay it out on my palette, add the same amount of mineral spirits to the same amount of Ichor of the Damned off to the side, and then start to apply it to my miniature. Now, because we've got black, that's going to do two things. One, it's going to deepen and darken some of those crevices that we want. It's also going to alter that black to make it look a bit deeper and richer. And now, because of that surface finish variation, with Ichor of the Damned being able to dry more on the satin side, we can use this on black armor perfectly for our surface finish variation. Now, once I've done like a basic application just here and there around the miniature, especially like places like valves and on the cape where you're going to get like ichors and just dampness coming out of them, especially where the blood and stuff's been, then this is where I'm going to start to add it in and around the miniature. Once that has dried, like we did with the sector rust, we can start to manipulate it with just the mineral spirits. And all I do is go into some of the sections and just start to feather and manipulate some of it out. And because it's an enamel, if we don't like it in that area, we can completely remove it. And again, I'm just being playful here and messing around with different dilutions of the Ichor of the Damned, whether it's 2:1, 3:1, and again, just manipulating it with the actual mineral spirits with a tiny amount on my brush at the same time, and just feathering those edges out as you would do with any sort of acrylic paint and water. Then at the end, you will be left with this really nice deep looking black armor with a ton of surface finish variation. However, we're not done there just yet. We're going to push it even further with some gore effects. Now for our gore effects, we're going to apply these in 2 stages. The first stage is by mixing 50-50 Ichor of the Damned with Carrion Crimson, and we're going to apply this to our miniature in like a splatting motion, and then I can also go in and manually paint some areas with a brush, like the pipes and some ichors dripping out of like crevices, and especially on the cape I'm going to add a little bit there, and around this little chainsaw thing at the top, which is what he probably uses to decapitate his enemies. But it's just a case of going around and adding some of the splats on your brush, and I've just done this with my finger. Again, you can use an airbrush for this if you do have one to hand, and then just pay attention to areas like you might have some splats coming down his shoulder blade, which has run a little bit, and then he's got like this tube that goes up near his mouth, and my intention for this was to be like some sort of frenzy feeding tube that had just sprayed blood into his mouth at any point he needs to start being rageful and just go into this berserker black rage state. The second phase of the gore effects to really build up like this guy's chopped and hacked through lot, so you've got different variations of blood, is blood for the blood god. Now this is just a red paint that's really high in gloss, so you could get some red paint that's more in line with blood, or like a reddy brown, and mix a bit of gloss in and use that if you don't have blood for the blood god. However, getting this different variation of colours and blood onto your miniature with different finishes again adds to that overall gore and surface finish variation. The flesh application was quite easy to render. All I used was a dry brush of Vallejo Game Heavy Warm Grey over a Stynylrez Grey primer, and then I just used a varied number of Citadel washes, and this is a phase I encourage you to get creative and use some different acrylic Citadel washes. I used a mix of ones that I recommend for like a vampiric flesh, is Reikland Flesh Shade and Berserker Blood Shade. Also, it's a good idea to put a little bit of like Colia green in and around the eyes. This will just darken them up and give them more like bruised overall decayed appearance, and then especially around the back of the head. But where we really want to start to play with it is in our application of Carrion Crimson. This is just a 1-to-1 ratio, so just mix it on your palette 1-to-1 with mineral spirits and apply it in and around all over the flesh area. And again, I'm just going to come in with a Q-tip and remove it from areas that I want to remove. Now again, this next stage is just a little bit playful, and all I'm doing is going back and forth between the Carrion Crimson and Abtalon 502's oil paint dust, and this is just to highlight certain areas and give it that more vampire pale appearance. And then to finish it off, we can paint our teeth white, but this doesn't really matter because we're going to come in with some gore effects that we've just used and put it in and around the mouth. But if you want some more skin recipes, then I'd highly recommend checking out our new Bestiarum course, and we do have a video here over on the YouTube channel by Dark Ages Workshop where he shows you a really good flesh application. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial, so let's just recap a couple of the key points for this miniature. Number one is obviously the build. That's like the main fundamental, and once you've nailed that and get that right, the rest just sort of speaks for itself. Number two is ratios, as we've gone over in the video, is about like thinning it and trying out different ratios, and then once they've dried you can further manipulate those ratios and the Villainy inks using mineral spirits. Number three is the gore effects, what are really going to sell this, because you know he's a vampire, we need some decent looking gore and blood in there. And then finally, the main application, which was the focus of this video, is surface finish variation. That is really going to set your miniatures apart from the rest, and on closer inspection you're just going to see further and further detail. One final bit of surface finish variation I would have added to this miniature is, depending on what basing scheme that you're going to use, I would have been tempted to get some pigment powders and put a little bit in and around his feet just to map them up and blend it into that base and onto the cape. But most of all, just remember to have fun. That's the main goal of our hobby, and it's really about experimenting with those Villainy inks, and especially the advice I gave for some kit bashing. So I did say right at the beginning that I did have some new news to share with you guys, and I can confirm that the Grimdark challenge is coming back. This is going to be a seasonal challenge that is going to test the mettle of you Grimdark artists, and the newest Grimdark challenge for this fall will be Forest Freaks, and this will run from October to the end of November. Exact details, dates and prizes will be available later down the road during the next few weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and following all our social media so that you can stay up to date with the new Grimdark challenge. With that said, I've been Nate the Feral Painter. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you do hit that like button. It'd really help us get this video out there if you could just hit that like button. But until next time guys, I'll catch you in the next video.